There were some crazy Armageddon games in Norway chess today. We had Grishuk blundering a piece in a quiet position against Fabiano Caruana. We had Wesley So allowing a mate in one against Levon Aronian. And then we had this game, Magnus Carlsen against Ding Liren, which was an absolute roller coaster of a game. A brilliant game, actually. Hope you're going to enjoy this. Magnus Carlsen with the white pieces in the Armageddon, so he's in a must-win situation. A draw for Ding, that gets him the points. So, started off as Spanish, and Magnus takes no chances and plays d3, quite a quiet move. But that's so typical of Magnus Carlsen. He loves this pawn structure. He gets it from in Spanish positions, in gioco pianos, so it's all very typical. And Ding decides to play in the most aggressive way, putting the bishop on c5. Well, why not if white is going to hang back with d3? And this position looks so similar to many gioco piano positions where black allows this move bishop g5, that the bishop is outside this pawn chain. Otherwise the bishop on e7, well, it would mean this pin is completely ineffectual. And now Ding decides to take matters in hand and doesn't mess around, just plays g5 straight away. Well, he's very, very fond of playing like this, even when he's already castled on the king side. So this one just seems very natural to him at any rate. But I think it is fine. Bishop b6, well, of course, that preempts d4 from white. And Magnus continues in typical fashion, bringing this knight into the game, and of course it might come around to f1 and maybe one of these squares. Knight a5 pushes the bishop back off that diagonal, and knight h5. Well, who said that knights on the rim were grim? There's a reason for playing them to the edge of the board here. Of course, this knight has this bishop in its sights, and also it makes room for the queen to come to potentially f6 as well in an active position. a4, absolutely typical for Spanish, so this rook comes into play. b4 pushes the knight back, and Ding decides not to mess around and he just takes that bishop on g3. You could be playing with potentially queen f6 or going knight into f4, but okay, he decides just to take on g3, and this is certainly not a bad continuation at all. Knight hops back to c6 and knight f1. So Magnus is looking, with due preparation, to put the knight on this very strong square on e3 where it looks at the outposts and looks at g4 as well. So queen f6, all very natural. And there's even a threat to push the pawn and then take on f2, therefore queen e2. And the knight comes back to e7 to cover those important squares so that it's not too much of a problem when the knight comes to e3. And now h5. This is a very curious position actually, because both sides are hanging back with castling. It's not clear at this moment where either king is going to find safety. And Magnus invested a bit of time here. Remember, he started with 10 minutes. Ding started with 7. I was watching this game live and I was kind of trying to think of a plan for white, and it is really not easy. I suppose an obvious move is to drop the knight back to d2 and, you know, get a little bit of attack here, but nothing very special. In the end, after quite a bit of thought, Magnus went for d4. Now that is a really brave move. You know, he likes to take the game by the scruff of the neck. He doesn't like to, make these kind of half moves with knight d2. d4, absolutely typical. But this was a real shocker, of course, for all of us watching, but for Ding as well. Well, what happens if this pawn is taken? First of all, let's just have a quick look at that. After this exchange, then White's king gets out, and the position is transformed. This is completely unclear because, of course, Black's king would like to escape, but then h5 is on, and it's just a complete mess. So instead of taking here, Ding decides to play g4, which is fair enough. And then Magnus took on e5. And Ding decides to recapture. Now, he did this very quickly, simply pawn takes pawn. But I was rather surprised because there's a forced sequence here leading to an endgame. And remember, if Black draws this game, then Black takes the points. Seems to me that this would have been a very safe continuation for Ding to play. Although White has an extra pawn, those pawns do not look very beautiful. And I think if Black plays prudently here, I can't see any other result but a draw, actually. So yeah, I was amazed that Ding simply recaptured on e5 so quickly. Now, doesn't mean there's anything particularly wrong with his position, but the tension is maintained here. And that's what Carlsen wants. And with the knight on h4 and everything kind of slightly locked, then of course it's safe for White's king to castle, and, well, relatively safe for Black's king as well. At least the queen is over on this side of the board to potentially protect the king. But Carlsen definitely has more of a shot than Black now. Rook a8 is a good move. Getting some counterplay here. But king h2, now that is a great move. We've seen this in many, many games that Magnus has played, but before Magnus, Kasparov, if you think of those extraordinary games he played against Karpov in their World Championship match in the Spanish, where at some moment in the middle of the attack, Kasparov just took a timeout to play king h2 to make sure the king's off the back rank and safe, and only then he ploughed on with the attack. Well, this is a similar kind of idea, that it takes the king off this diagonal and tees up for f4, and the king protects the g3 pawn, and it's completely safe on h2. So I really like king h2. Good move for a blitz game. I mean, they were virtually blitzing at this moment. Rook a3. In fact, they were playing these moves incredibly quickly. That's one thing I've noticed, that the players do seem to be speeding up in the Armageddon games. They're treating it like a blitz game rather than a speed game. But, well, as we saw today, maybe sometimes it was a bit too quick. And here is where Magnus started to get going in the position. Rook d6. And in combination with this bishop, and potentially the queen, and in fact all White's pieces, Black has to be very careful here. The most prudent thing to do would be to just push the rook back. But king g7, oh boy! Really? You're either very brave or very foolish to play a move like king g7. Or you're just short of time. Magnus sees the moment. c4. Good move. Of course, the move you'd like to play here is bishop d4, but that runs into trouble. Let's just have a little look at that one. Rook takes bishop. And there we go. You can see the first problem with playing the king to g7. Magically, the diagonal has opened, and with a double attack. Back we go. How does Black deal with this? not so simple. If you take on e3, then that opens up the f-file. Doesn't look too clever. All the while, just look at white's king, how safe that is. So c4, just played. Bishop c7 from Ding. And this is where I think Magnus missed a great chance. He played very quickly, he played f4, exploiting this pin on the long diagonal. And I think it's somehow such an attractive move that he just kind of played it really without much contemplation. In fact, just playing c5 here would keep up the pressure. So first thing is, black really shouldn't take that, because this leads to all kinds of pressure and initiative for white. One could simply check on f5 here and take on e5 like this. That's already excellent compensation for white. But there's actually an even stronger move. Queen c1. There's a really sneaky move. Threatening a check. That's another reason why king g7 somehow looked a bit dodgy to me, because it sets up some kind of check on f5 as well. And here, after king h7, queen c5, and here's a beautiful move. I know this is a bit of a diversion, but just watch this. Using the pin this time on this rank, and that is very unpleasant. So after pawn takes pawn, knight takes, followed by knight e5, and that is winning for white. All white's pieces looking absolutely tremendous. Anyway, that's a bit of fantasy variation. After c5, of course, black does not need to take the rook. You can play king h7, and then, okay, let's put the rook back. But this looks very pleasant for white. The bishop's not looking too good here. White has potential to play the knight in. I just think black has to be extremely careful here. Not to mention f4. On a good day, f4 might be a good move. But yeah, white is for choice there, definitely. Okay, let's go back. But Magnus played f4. And it looks so attractive because of this pin. But I think he'd simply underestimated this move. If knight takes pawn, this did not happen. Then, in fact, after this, which at first you think, well, this looks great, but actually after this one, black is fine here. This rook is dropping. Let's go back. I mean, there are alternatives, but that's basically the problem. So Magnus had to compromise. He brought his rook back to defend that knight on e3. Pawn was taken on g2 and king takes. Now at this stage, well, you can see I've noted down the clock times. Carlsen had 5 minutes and 41 seconds remaining. Ding had 3 minutes 46. So Carlsen's still with a 2 minute time advantage. Now black has a pawn up, but f6, that's a solid move, making sure there's nothing going to happen on that diagonal. c5 keeps the black squared bishop locked in, and Ding, I think, played a very pragmatic move here. He exchanged off a pair of rooks, and that rook on d3 was defending the knight on f5, or on e3 rather. And this is tricky for white, because the king really is a little bit exposed. Black's queen now looks excellent on g5, not only covering black's king, but also hassling white's king as well. Rook a3, an unpleasant move. Magnus, of course, has to play for the win. Queen d3 attacks the bishop, which came here. And now Magnus plunged in. It's very difficult to find any kind of sensible continuation for white here. Now the clock time's 4:55 for Carlsen, Ding 2 minutes 40, so getting down to the wire. Now there are problems for white because of that pin. So queen c2 played. And now an excellent move from Ding. Queen g4. And this is incredibly difficult for white. The position is practically Zugzwang. Almost every move that white makes actually compromises his position. So let's just take a look. If the queen moves away from the bishop, then rook takes bishop. If the queen moves here to attack the rook, then queen takes pawn check. So the queen has to look out for the bishop and the pawn. If this knight moves, let's say to e3, then there's queen h3 check, and suddenly the queen breaks through to the king. So you can see white is so short of moves here, and maybe this one is in the air as well, just playing h4. So after some reflection, Carlsen played rook f3 just to try and hold things together, defending these. In fact, there's now an incredibly strong move for black. Ding played here bishop takes knight, which is not bad, but actually bishop e6 is incredibly strong. So remember, if black can exchange everything here, then the e4 pawn will be dropping with check, and then the knight goes. So that's the kind of pressure that white is under. And if bishop takes bishop, then queen takes. Well, I mean, this is black is moving in. This is obviously just winning for black. So bishop e6 was an incredibly strong move here, but Ding, running really short on time now, took on f5. Rook takes, and then played h4. You know, I think when you're under pressure, there's a real temptation to simplify, particularly when you know that you only need a draw. So I think Ding was being really pragmatic here. He saw a decent continuation and went for it. And, well, his judgment was probably correct, actually. But Carlsen now is back in the game. He's not lost at any rate. He's managed to break through. And here, take care. If the rook takes, then the queen breaks through here, and then the rook takes the bishop. So Magnus has to defend the g3 pawn. So watch out for a queen f6 check, followed by a mate there. So queen takes pawn. So queens are exchanged. So in this endgame, at the moment, Ding is a pawn up. If rook takes bishop here, well, that is absolutely fine for black. Let's just have a very quick look at that. So rook takes bishop, check, and then the king just marches up the board. And in fact, it's white that has to be careful in this position, but it should be a draw. Therefore, Carlsen played bishop e6. Now, as far as I think I got this right, but both players had about 2 minutes here. Not a lot of time. Rook takes bishop threatened, so that bishop dropped. Now Carlsen was obviously worried about this move, followed by a... Oh, well, you can't check there, of course. Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting decision. He played king h3. In fact, turns out to be a very clever decision. It's not just about preventing bishop h4, actually. In fact, it doesn't prevent bishop h4 because the g-pawn will go through. But anyway, there's more to this move than meets the eye. Let's see what that is. So black's bishop emerges. The rook swings across, and now bishop f4. So everything's locked. And now king g5. Now, wasn't absolutely necessary to play king g5. The king could have retreated. But, you know, in the endgame, you want to play as actively as possible. So, very understandable that the king comes up the board, and it's not a bad move. But suddenly, it gets tricky. And now we see the point of playing the king to h3, covers useful squares here, and this move is a big threat. And here, Ding running very short of time, maybe down to about a minute. He got it wrong. He got it badly wrong. Let's see. So this is the threat. So you want to make room for the king. Well, there's a few mistakes here. Let's try bishop c1. That's a mistake, because after this, now obviously this one, I say obviously, king there. Is there a win actually? I don't know if there's a win. No, because that one will lead to a draw, because that one is protected. Maybe that's still a draw. I have a feeling it looks very, very suspicious. Maybe it's a draw. I don't know. I'm probably overlooking something horrendous. But anyway, we'll move on. King f4 is losing because of this. There are so many tricks here. And yeah. Oh, that's right. In this position, I forgot there's a passed c pawn and then c6. So if we go back here, king h5 is actually losing. I forgot that in this position it's not a draw because we take here. I do beg your pardon. Yeah, obviously. And then the c pawn goes through, as in the main variation. So bishop c1 would be a mistake. Well, let's go back here. So this position, rook g6 threatened. In fact, bishop e3, not an obvious move when you're, basically blitzing, because it doesn't look like it gives the king enough room. But actually, the point is this, that after this, and rook g4 check, the bishop on e3 blocks the third rank. So in fact, black isn't losing any material here and should be okay. Let's go back. But instead of all this, Ding played bishop d2, thinking that he was giving his king enough room to escape. But no, after this, and rook g4, that was the end of the game. But Ding just couldn't believe it. He was distraught. Before he resigned, before he shook hands, he was shaking his head and, well, just trying to come to terms with it. Point is that after this, the rook is skewered on the third rank, and that is game over. What a fantastic fight. And I think Magnus, how does he do it? Such determination, his will to win, his will to survive is so keen, and he managed somehow to keep his chances alive. So with that win in the Armageddon, he is still in the lead in the tournament. It's a rest day tomorrow. Thanks for watching.